A father and his son were out walking one afternoon when the youngster asked his dad, "How does that electricity work between those poles?" "I don't know," said the father. "I never knew much about electricity." A few blocks farther on, the boy asked, "What caused lightning and thunder?" "To tell you the truth," said the father, "I never understood that myself." The boy continued to ask questions throughout the stroll, none of which the father could answer. And finally, as they were nearing their home, the boy said, "Dad, I hope you don't mind me asking all these questions." "Of course not," replied the father. "How else are you going to learn anything?" I feel like that father sometimes sitting down to write a sermon. Seriously, I think, what the hell, literally, what the hell, depending on the readings, is this about? What in heaven's name will I say here? What is my answer to the incessant questions posed in these readings? And who assigned them anyway? And who am I to stand here and pontificate? And yet we do. Those of us who, for various reasons, sign up for this gig by going to seminary, becoming masters of divinity, and are ordained, appointed to preach. And yet we do. Nancy, last week, talking of her faith and numbness and grief at the loss of her very son. Debbie, Rebecca, Liz, Lily. Debbie just beginning seminary and so excited. Lily, a mere lay person. Why are they preaching? Where does the authority come from? How does one teach and answer questions? For me, it's about the heart. The heart is the key to the soul. Reason is the governor. The intellect is important and utterly necessary, of course, to create a logical sermon and a rational or semi-rational life. But it is the heart, the soul, the gut, feeling, awareness of emotion, those human elements which make a faithful sermon, which ordain a good preacher, I believe, and point us in the right and good direction. After preaching to the same community for over 26 years, I occasionally go back and read former sermons, and I think I've shared this before. I'm often surprised. I was like, that's pretty good. How did I do that? And why don't I remember it? And if I don't remember it, who remembers it? But I knew it, and I said it, and I believed it, or I quoted someone, a wise person, clever person, and talked about morality and ethics and living our lives in spiritually healthy ways. But how do we keep that? How do we hold on to it? How do we progress over time? It's like St. Paul's famous existential conversation today in that epistle to the Romans. I do not understand my own actions. And he writes, I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Who has not had the experience of doing something or saying something regretful, the opposite of our self-image or the image to which we aspire? I was not myself, we say. And yet, as St. Paul says to his Christian brothers and sisters in Rome 2,000 years ago, part of me is sinful, is self-centered at the expense of others. Who will rescue me? He says it is Christ himself. Somehow Christ has turned his world upside down, and he is newly right side up, even as a significantly flawed human being. What is it inside of ourselves that desires such an honest revelation and change. In the gospel today, Jesus is clearly saying it's time to grow up spiritually. Stop judging people, he says. John the Baptist comes, he says this, he does this. I come and do this, and we're both demonized. Stop judging people. It says more about you. Have you not been honest about yourself? Wisdom, Jesus says, is vindicated by her deeds. Don't be childish spiritually. How do you affect others? How does your behavior affect others? How are you spiritually wise? What are you actually teaching by your behavior? And then Jesus says those Sabbath words, those healing words, heartfelt, feeling words, as he always does. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. He knows about the life-giving Spirit that is there for us. What is most important to Jesus is saying, it's more important than the yoke, it's more important than rules, it's more important than law, it's more important than judgment that religious authorities too often cling to at the expense of people. And you know what it is. It's compassion and mercy and unconditional love. It's like the famous and poignant Maya Angelou quote. Remember? I've learned that people will forget what you said, all the sermons. People will forget what you did, all our deeds. But people will never forget how you made them feel. And I'm not saying Jesus' priority is for people to feel good regardless of other factors. Of course not. I'm saying Jesus puts compassion and mercy first. This is the ground of our being as Christ followers. This is the measure of our spiritual progress. Can we treat others with a holy regard? Can we start with mercy, start there and hold ourselves accountable, and then and only then share our wisdom or our opinion, our words, our judgment as to what we believe is the best thing to say or to do. Jesus is about solidarity of the heart. This is the meaning of life. When a community shares a solidarity of the heart, good things happen. We just celebrated the 4th of July, our independence as a country. But as a spiritual community, interdependence is the key, right? And I would make an argument with many of you for the interdependence of our country being key to survival, treating each other with regard in order to progress, in order to grow as a political body, somehow. Remember, it was 10 years or more after the Declaration of Independence, 1787, that the Constitution was sent to the states for ratification. Only after heavy, long, difficult political debate. Declaring independence was the easy part. Working out how people could actually live out their freedom, detailing the parameters, the rights, the liberties, the law was the hard part. For example, should states be represented in Congress based on their population or based on equal representation? Okay, let's do both. What about slaves? Do they count? You remember the telling result that each slave would be counted as 3/5 of a free citizen. Thank God that changes to law and liberty continued to be fought through. Because this decision was not about justice, it was about political power for those states having slaves. What about taxes or the power of the president? Freedom was grand, but detailed expression was difficult, and at some point, independence met compromise. The question for us as Christians is not so much what we seek freedom from, but what we seek freedom for. And how, if we are true followers of Christ's example, how do we honor our interdependence with each other and with those who are different, with the stranger, with those deemed unworthy, unequal, with those who are demonized, those who are outcast, those hurting, those abandoned? Solidarity, the reality that all are of God and that God's love is unconditional, shapes our freedom, our free will to choose to act in certain ways. There is great power in that, to be faithful and to keep trying together, to be disciplined, to work out the details towards the goal of inclusion and interdependence. This effort reflects the vision of Christ, as we know, in our hearts. St. Augustine said, "We imitate those we adore." May we adore Jesus. May we adore the merciful way of Christ. May we take steps each day to increase our compassion and use our heads to shape our hearts and our minds to shape our actions, so that we progress each day and we try to remember who we are and what is important and what will make a difference. In the spirit of the heart today, I want to end with two stories. This is a story called Building for the Future. Once there was a good man who wanted to do good, and one day he noticed the unhappy, miserable conditions in which a poor carpenter lived. The rich man called the carpenter in and commissioned him to build a beautiful house. He said, "I want this to be an ideal cottage for my guests. So use the best materials, employ the best workers, and spare no expense." He said he was going on a journey and that he hoped that the house would be finished when he returned. The carpenter saw this as a wonderful opportunity. Therefore, he skimped on materials. He hired inferior workers at low wages. He covered their mistakes with paint and plaster and cut corners whenever he could. When the rich man returned, the carpenter brought him the key and said, "I have followed your instructions. I built your house as you told me." "I'm glad," said the rich man, handing the key back to the builder. "Here are the keys. This is yours. I had you build the house for yourself. You and your family are to have it as my gift." In the years that followed, the carpenter never ceased to regret the way in which he cheated himself. "Had I only known," he would say to himself, "that I was building this house for myself." And the last story I want to end with today, remember the story of Zacchaeus, the short-statured man who was a tax collector when Jesus was coming to town, and he wanted to hear Jesus as well, even though he was despised by his neighbors as a tax collector. And so he went to the sycamore tree and climbed the tree, and Jesus called him down by name, spoke with him, went to his house, ate with him, and Zacchaeus was changed and made reparations for all those he cheated. There's a legend about him later, and according to that legend, he would arise early every morning and leave his house, and his wife, extremely curious at the strange behavior, decided to follow him one morning, and she watched her husband take a bucket to the well, fill it with water, and then walk out of the town gates. He would stop at a sycamore tree, and there he set down the bucket and cleared any debris which had accumulated at the foot of the tree, and having done this, he poured the water around the roots, caressed the trunk of the tree, and stood in seeming awe. It was at this point that his wife came out of her hiding place and asked him what he was doing. Without hesitation, Zacchaeus answered his wife's question by saying, "This is where I found Christ." Mercy, compassion, redemption, new and ongoing life. What are you watering so that your own gratitude, your own redemptive grace, your own faith will continue to grow here in this place and at home and in the world? What are you watering? In the name of Christ. Amen.